In this movie, we will perform coronal or frontal dissection of the preserved human brain. Using sharp dissection knife, we will make series of cuts that will reveal different structures in the brain. Now we are looking at the lateral view of the brain. Each section will be laid down on the tray, and we will point to the structures that are visible on each level. So now you're looking at the dorsal view of the brain. So this is the anterior part of the brain, and this is the posterior part of the brain. Where we make cuts, we will cut with a sharp knife, starting from the rostral and progressing toward the caudal part. Let's make first cut. This cut is first cut we made, and it is through the frontal lobe. What we can see here? We can see here gray matter and white matter, and we can see gyri and sulci between. The gray matter or cortex consists of the cell bodies of the glia and neurons, while the white matter consists of the axons. They are processes of neurons that connect neurons of the cortex with another parts of the cortex or the other brain regions. So this is the second cut we made. Again, you have here gray matter and white matter. What we can see in this level is beginning of the corpus callosum. Corpus callosum is a bundle of white matter that connects two hemispheres. The other thing what we can identify here is the lateral sulcus here on the side. Now we are looking at the third section I made through the frontal lobe. In this section you can see basal ganglia. Basal ganglia are a group of neurons with mostly motor functions. So in this, what we can see in this level, first we can see longitudinal fissure which divides left and right hemisphere. You can see very well formed corpus callosum, that is white matter that connects two hemispheres. We can also see lateral ventricles beneath. Sitting on the lateral ventricles on the lateral side is caudate nucleus. Caudate nucleus is the, one of the group of neurons which belong to the basal ganglia. On this level here on the lateral side, you can see putamen. Putamen together with caudate and putamen makes a structure called striatum. Structure which is between caudate and putamen is internal capsule. In this level, internal capsule, we can see anterior limb of the internal capsule. Now we have cut through the optic chiasm. You cannot see very well here, but in the ventral part it's optic chiasm. To remind you, optic chiasm is crossing of the optic nerve, and after crossing of the optic chiasm, optic nerve becomes optic tract. You can see also some blood vessel, for example. This is a middle cerebral artery. But what we can see very well here, we can see a lot of basal ganglia, and another structure which is called anterior commissure. Anterior commissure is similarly like corpus callosum, bundle of the axons which connect left and right hemisphere. Let's now review what we can see from basal ganglia here. Again, this is the lateral ventricle. And the lateral ventricles are divided by a structure called septum pellucidum, which is thin membrane between two cerebral hemispheres. Next to the lateral ventricle is caudate nucleus or nucleus caudatus, which is basal ganglia. Toward the midline here we have globus pallidus, which is again a member of the basal ganglia, and here on the side, lateral side, is putamen. Putamen and globus pallidus are divided by this white matter structure, which is called internal capsule, and in this level, this is anterior limb of internal capsule. What else we can see here? We can see here some structure which is called ventral pallidum, which is again part of the basal ganglia. We can see lateral sulcus, for example, here, which is the one structure which separate lobes of the hemisphere. You can see longitudinal fissure, and we will now move to the next level. So this is next level, and this level is actually is pretty nice because you can see here optic chiasm better than in previous level. You can see very well lateral ventricles. You can see very well internal capsule, caudate nucleus, putamen, globus pallidus, anterior commissure. And what I will point here, which I didn't point in previous sections, are also two structures, two white matter structures, which are external capsule and extreme capsule, which separates basal ganglia from the rest of the cortex. So this is a more caudal part of the basal ganglia. You can see here in the lateral ventricle nucleus caudatus, but in this level we can see another structure which we didn't see in previous one, which is a diencephalon, or in this case thalamus and hypothalamus. So thalamus is toward the midline, and between them there is a third ventricle. So we remember we have lateral ventricle here, we have third ventricle here. So basal ganglia, when you cut in this level basal ganglia, and the rest of the basal ganglia are more on the lateral side, so you can still see internal capsule, but in this case internal capsule is posterior. You can see posterior limb of the internal capsule, and on the lateral sides are the basal ganglia, putamen and globus pallidus. What else we can see in this section is the pons, and these structures here, which are not very well observed, and I will show you them in another section as well, is hippocampus. Hippocampus is a structure important for the memory, and it is situated in the temporal lobe of the cerebral hemisphere. In this view, I will point to some structure in the brain which is still not dissected, and again, this is the level of a sectioning through the diencephalon. That means that we pass basal ganglia, now we are in diencephalon and more caudal sections. In previous section I show you hippocampus, but it was not really well distinguished. Here we can see very well a hippocampus. Hippocampus is the structure which is sitting in the temporal lobe. This is temporal lobe of the cortex, and it is important for the memory. What else we can see very well here is the corpus callosum, again white matter, gray matter. So this structure coming from the white matter of the cerebral cortex and connecting cerebral cortex with other structures of the brain is the internal capsule. You can see very well here internal capsule. Internal capsule has anterior limb, which you saw in previous section. In this section, it is posterior limb of the internal capsule. So where are the basal ganglia here? Basal ganglia are, one of the members of the basal ganglia is caudatus. It is here. It is very small here, but then we have another structures which are more pushed on the side and on the lateral. So this is caudate and this is putamen. I'm sorry. This is putamen and the globus pallidus, which are bordered by the external and extreme capsule. In this view, we can see lateral ventricle and third ventricle. Third ventricle is on the level of diencephalon. What else we can see here? You can see those structures which are oval structure. So that structure is red nucleus. Structure between, which looks like a mustache here, black, is substantia nigra. Both those structures are on the level of midbrain. So now you can see that we section through the diencephalon, midbrain, and ventrally from the midbrain you have pons. So you have here pons, midbrain, diencephalon, and then cerebral cortex. So this is the cut from the brain which I just show you. But in this section you can see very well third ventricle. You see this third ventricle is here, and this on the both sides of third ventricle is the diencephalon. First you have thalamus here and you have hypothalamus here. Lateral ventricle, so this is fornix, another structure of white matter which connects different parts of the brain. So those are, that is a substantia nigra and red nucleus, and this is the pons. What is missing here is hippocampus, which I show you, which is still intact in the brain. So this is a view from of the cut through the temporal lobe, and you can still here see hippocampus here sitting in the temporal lobe. So those are lateral ventricles, you can see very well. So here is actually, you can see some choroid plexus, which makes cerebrospinal fluid. This is thalamus. What is here very visible is the midbrain. And midbrain has a structure called superior and inferior colliculi. What we can see here is superior colliculi. Also this hole here would be cerebral aqueduct, which is another ventricular part of ventricular system. Below here are the red nuclei, and we cannot see in this views substantia nigra, which we observe in previous views. So this is the midbrain, diencephalon. Pons is here, and then we have a medulla oblongata. What is very interesting here and what we can see is those two structures which look like arms. Those arms will connect pons to the cerebellum. Cerebellum is on the back of the brain, little brain. So we have here cerebellum, which is connected by middle cerebral peduncle with the pons. Cerebellum is connected with the midbrain by the superior cerebral peduncles, which are this, and it's connected to the medulla oblongata by inferior cerebral peduncles. But all these three peduncles, inferior, middle, and superior peduncles, could be visible in this view. But middle is really very well distinguished because it is the biggest peduncle. So this is the cut I made through the cerebral cortex, and I already pointed you to a lot of structures in the previous view, such as peduncles, cerebral cortex, hippocampus, diencephalon, cerebral aqueduct, lateral ventricles, third ventricle. But I will flip this section and point you to another structures we can see in the flip view. Okay, what we have see here is the posterior limb of the lateral ventricle, and this structure here is the choroid plexus. As I mentioned, choroid plexus is a structure which makes cerebrospinal fluid, and we can see here the cerebellum, section through the cerebellum. What I can point you here is the gray matter of cerebellum and white matter of cerebellum. White matter of cerebellum is also named arbor vitae, which looks like tree of life because it has that shape. So this is the view of the most posterior view of the caudal view of the cerebral hemisphere, and on this here part is occipital lobe, and this is a temporal lobe, and this is a posterior horn of the lateral ventricle, and this is still corpus callosum. Corpus callosum in this level is called splenium, and you have here a longitudinal fissure. This is lateral ventricle, and so in this level we passed basal ganglia, thalamus. In previous section we also saw some subcortical structures. So this is the far back of the cerebral hemisphere, how it looks like, and this would be the end of our dissection. So this final view shows series of the sections I made through this dissection movie, starting from the anterior or frontal and going back to the caudal or posterior. To review, when you cut the brain in the rostral part, you will see gray matter, white matter, start seeing corpus callosum connection between two hemispheres, which becomes bigger as you progress toward the caudal part. Then you start seeing basal ganglia, internal capsule, which is between them. On the more, as you're progressing to the caudal part, those caudal basal ganglia are more visible. You start seeing anterior commissure. This is the optic chiasm. As you progress more caudally, you start seeing diencephalon. In this case, is thalamus and hypothalamus. In the ventral part, so this is dorsal part. In the ventral part, in this level, which is through the temporal lobe, you can see hippocampus. Then this structure here is a pons. So when you cut coronal section through the brain, you will have cerebral hemisphere, but you will have subcortical structures such as pons. Next level, you will also have the very well distinguished midbrain. So this is the pons, this is midbrain, diencephalon, and this is cerebral hemisphere. Lateral ventricle, third ventricle, you can see here, and then midbrain. This level really shows very well hippocampus, shows very well midbrain and substantia nigra. Then this is the pons. Again, this is diencephalon, basal ganglia here on the lateral side. And finally, in this view, those two views, you can see cerebellum. Cerebellum is on the back of the brain, it's called also small brain or little brain, and it is connected with medulla, with pons and midbrain by the cerebral peduncles. You can see them very well here. Then you can see here thalamus, lateral ventricles, and then in this final view, which I did not cut, which I left intact, You can see lateral ventricle and some of the choroid plexus. And this would be the end of our dissection movie.